All right. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Barbara Coffey, Director of Economic Initiatives for the City of Tucson. And I'm very excited about today's topic, so much so that we've made this an interactive meeting today so you can all participate freely with questions and comments. I think you're going to love the program. We can still take questions in the chat, so you can use that as well. And we ask that you just stay muted while our presenters are sharing so we can catch every nugget of wisdom that they impart today. We will record this session and make it available for everyone tomorrow. You can find links to all our previous webinars at connecttucson.com. And again, I mentioned we may have a guest visitor soon from our current council. And if she is able to join, I will pause. We'll make sure and introduce her and have remarks from her. So let's get started. I will introduce the team today, who is our featured presentation, the team from Project Equity. Evan Edwards is Director of Strategic Partnerships and Business Engagement. Evan began his career as the International Business Manager at a tech startup, Quarterdeck Corporation. He spent a number of years in leadership and consulting roles at a variety of early stage enterprises, including Bid.com, MediaSeek Technology, and Planitia Corporation. Then Evan moved into the nonprofit sector as Executive Director of YMCA of Los Angeles prior to his current role with Project Equity. Evan is a graduate of Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. Alongside Evan is Annie Palacios, Business Engagement and Partnership Manager with Project Equity. Annie built her career around strategic client engagement and business development outreach for multiple industry sectors across various international consultancies. She worked for the UK government from 2013 to 2018, developing relationships with investors and providing business advisory services to support expansion projects and promote job growth. Prior roles have included cultivating relationships with financial institutions in North and Latin American regions for a London-based think tank. Annie holds an MA in International Relations from London Metropolitan University, as well as a BA in Political Science from Texas A&M University at Corpus Christi. At Project Equity, she creates and nurtures collaborative partnerships to drive forward structured programs and raise awareness about employee ownership. So with that, welcome Evan and Annie, and I'll kick it off to one or both of you, and feel free to share your screens and move us forward. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Barbara. We appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. We will. What we're going to do is we're going to share a little bit about employee ownership as both a business succession, but also an economic development and equity strategy. We have formed partnerships you all may be aware of with a number of localities across the country where we have implemented our programs to help those localities leverage employee ownership and all the business advantages and economic advantages it can bring. So I think what we'll do is Annie and I we're fairly casual with this. We want to share information, but we also want to make sure that we round out your understanding. So she and I will kind of take turns here with her kicking off, and then happy to answer questions at the end. And again, if you have some that we don't get to, if you go ahead and put them in the chat, that would be great for us. So Annie.
Yes, so I'll go ahead and start by sharing the screen. Okay, so I'll just please let me know that you can see everything once I put that.
Great, yes.
On board. Okay. Okay, perfect. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, brilliant. So, so what we want to, talk about today is we want to explain employee ownership. And we want you all to get a better idea of what employee ownership is and understand all of the benefits to it. So presenting will be, of course, Evan and myself. And what we're going to discuss, we've put forward here an agenda. So we like to touch on what is employee ownership, what's its truest and simplest definition, what are the benefits. We'll discuss a little bit more on the models and provide some different business examples for you. We'll go over the transition process, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So we'd like to start a little bit just to introduce ourselves and what we do at Project Equity. So for those of you who don't know, we are a national nonprofit. We are headquartered in the Bay Area of California, and we specialize in employee ownership transitions of businesses. We have, as Evan mentioned earlier, we have lots of different partnerships with different municipalities across the states who really support our work. And we do feasibility. We do supporting of the financial deal structuring. And we also develop the participatory culture among staff. Now, we are passionate about employee ownership here at Project Equity. We do this for a variety of reasons. Primarily, we want businesses to keep rooted in their local communities. We want to provide business owners with a fair sale price. And we want really to just show employee ownership as a viable succession option worth considering. So what is employee ownership? You know, we hear this a lot. So what is it? Well, employee ownership, to start, is a strategy. It's a strategy that promotes economic resiliency for workers, and in some instances, a pathway for them to prosperity. It provides business owners with market rate return on their business, and it provides communities with job and business retention and economic stability. In a nutshell, that's what employee ownership is. So initially at Project Equity, we were focused primarily on the silver tsunami crisis. Now, this is where droves of baby boomer owners looking to retire would put their businesses at risk of possible closure. And what we've learned through the additional crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic is that employee ownership can really serve as a job retention as well as a business recovery strategy. Now, a little bit of the Arizona landscape for you all. So we at Project Equity are really big on data and really showing a data analysis to emphasize the case for employee ownership. Now, we did some data analysis of the business community in Arizona, and here are just a few highlights to show to you all today. So what I'd like to emphasize is that 1 in 3 workers of Arizona businesses are employed at businesses that are 20 years or more in operating age. And you know, our data analysis indicate that these businesses would be more likely to close because owners would be essentially retiring. So with that bit of introduction, I'll turn it over to Evan to discuss more about, the selling and what the process entails for converting to employee ownership. So Evan, over to you.
Great, thank you, Annie. And just to put a little bit finer point on Annie's comment with regard to the Arizona landscape, we have done a lot of diligence and analysis to understand that essentially business owners who have owned a business for 20 or more years tend to be in their late 50s, early 60s. That coincides with most folks either buying their first business or feeling comfortable enough to start their own business in their late 30s, early 40s. They've got some experience in a field, or they've got some equity in a home that they're willing to put at risk, and they buy a business. So you fast forward 20 years, and they're probably on the path to retirement. And the reason that the businesses are at risk is because most businesses don't sell. Nowadays, they might be posted with a broker or on a platform. Only about 20% actually sell for anywhere near the price that the business owner is seeking. And then only about 15% of businesses pass intergenerationally in families. We regularly talk with business owners who say, oh, well, my kids, they're going to grad school or they want to build an app. They don't want to take over the family business. So that leaves this big gap, right? So I said 15, 20%, 35%. So 65% of small businesses tend to be at risk for some type of closure. And because we're in this particular period, this bubble with the baby boomers, there are quite a few businesses that are at risk of closure. That phenomena was exacerbated and accelerated by COVID, where we had a lot of business owners just throw up their hands and say, you know what, I made it through the 2009 recession. I can't slug it out again. And so when we've had the opportunity to talk to those business owners about employee ownership and what it means to sell your business to your employees, the light bulb goes off and they're like, this is great. These people I've worked with for years don't have to put their jobs at risk. They've helped me. I can now do them solid. I can exit the business for, as Annie noted, a market rate return. And importantly to you all and the other local communities we work with, keep those businesses rooted locally in the community, in that local economy. So to the slide at hand, selling a business isn't easy. I noted to you that only about 20% of businesses sell and only about 15% transition within families. And that means that quite a number of businesses are at risk of closing. So most business owners tend to not think about succession. And I've been doing this work for about 4.5 years. Annie joined my team a couple of years ago. And we feel like, as much as business people, we're oftentimes psychologists when it comes to talking to business owners, because business owners really don't want to talk about retiring or selling their business. They're so inextricably identity tied up in their businesses. It's almost as though you're talking with them about their own death. And so business owners rarely consider succession. And oftentimes when they do finally think about it, it's too late. So in front of you on this slide, we are noting the different succession options that business owners are usually faced with. And so we mentioned some of the limitations of selling to family members. Oftentimes selling to a family member, even if you can get a family member to want to buy the business, you're not going to get anywhere near the return you might expect. Acquisition, that really depends on the size of the business, the community. There's a number of variables. And typically, if it's a strategic buy, unless a small business has a really significant value proposition to its acquirer, again, the business owner won't get a fair price. Also true of most small business acquisitions is the workforce isn't retained. Okay. The closing down operations, that happens far too often than we'd like. The way it oftentimes manifests itself is the business owner may own the real estate that the business operates from and finds that, I can get a great return on the real estate, or I'm in a community that is subject to gentrification. And so, I know that the real estate developers are going to pay me a pretty penny. So they just close it down, and gone are the jobs, gone is preserving the character of the local community, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you all are familiar with it. Employee ownership actually checks all of the boxes of what generally is really important to business owners. Business owners frequently want to preserve their legacy. They want to see some return on investment. A lot of business owners, you'd be surprised, aren't really looking to get rich from the sale of their business. They've often looked at their business as their paycheck for the years that they've operated, but they never really thought about selling it and seeing some kind of return. And so when we're able to talk to them and say, well, actually you can get a market rate return through an employee ownership transaction, they're pretty excited about that. Oftentimes there's tax benefits. If you're an older business owner selling your business, then frequently you can see some relief from capital gains. And then, of course, as I mentioned, in one of the aspects of this work that's really important to project equity is the retention of the employees, and in fact, conveying ownership of the business to them, providing ownership of small business to workers, as Annie indicated, provides them with greater economic resiliency. In many cases, if it's a very successful business, can provide pathways to prosperity, workers have greater agency, and local communities benefit by and by. So let's talk about some of the benefits of employee ownership. This from the standpoint of the small business owner. Profit margins, our research indicates, tend to escalate in employee-owned businesses. Why? Well, if you now have a workforce that has quote unquote skin in the game, right? They are now owners in the business. It's amazing how they become more conscious of, hey, do we really need to buy this X, Y, or Z? Or, how is it that we can contain costs? And any one of a number of ways that employees engage with what we like to think of as ownership mentality once the business has become employee owned. So that ends up manifesting itself in higher profits. Employee owned businesses also tend to grow faster. Now, we've seen this growth somewhat diluted via COVID. And we'll probably be doing a little bit more surveying coming up here on the other side. But we know that generally speaking, that employee-owned businesses tend to be more successful. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you build ownership culture. And with ownership culture comes the desire for the workforce to take more responsibility for bottom line performance of the business. So fewer layoffs with employee ownership. So we'll give some examples here going forward, but one of the things that we saw with employee-owned companies through the pandemic was rather than having a single owner or two owners or shareholders making a decision that we're going to lay off, these 5 employees, or we're going to shut down this particular part of our business. What we found is that, workers who are now worker owners and are engaged through governance, were making decisions like, let's all take a 35% pay cut so that everyone keeps their job and everyone keeps their benefits. And we can, pivot and make whatever decisions that we need to make going forward, but nobody has to lose their job. That's just one example of why there are fewer layoffs with employee-owned businesses. Another example, again, is that employee-owned businesses, because those workers, our owners, tend to make decisions that benefit the workforce in the whole, as opposed to a particular owner's interest, which is oftentimes not aligned with a workforce's interest. Better wages. So as you might imagine, worker-owned companies tend to pay better. One of the ways that this is manifested is through profit sharing. So in Project Equity's work, because much of our work is rooted in mission and a mission of serving low and moderate income workers, is we model into the transitions that we do a form of profit sharing called patronage in co-ops. And then if it's another form of employee ownership, an ESOP or an EOT, there are other profit sharing mechanisms that we include. And this is ostensibly so that workers can see some of the benefits of business owners that are usually availed of business owners who might take distributions or a particular weighted salary or whatever the case might be. So the performance of employee-owned companies. So again, this goes back to the comment that I was making earlier about ownership culture. And when you have a workforce that is comprised of worker owners, and they have that skin in the game, they have that stake, they tend to work a little bit harder. They see themselves, their identity tied up to in the business, and therefore they want to extend themselves to see that it's successful. So why is it that an employee buyout is so much more beneficial than other means of a business owner selling or transitioning out? Well, for one thing, if I'm a business owner and I'm selling my business on the market through a business broker or on Biz Buy Sell or another platform, I may or may not get the sale price that I'm seeking. Um, frequently, if you're engaged in what we call a sale where there's some friction, that acquiring business owner or prospective acquirer might try to grind you down on price as the business owner, grind me down on price or extract other considerations. With employee ownership, project equity engages what we call a feasibility assessment, which is ostensibly a form of due diligence that helps us to arrive at the sale price of the business based on uh, its ability to service debt. Okay, so we call it a debt capacity analysis, and hold on to that concept because I'll get into discussing it more in a couple of more slides. But what that debt capacity analysis essentially does is allows us to understand how much debt the business could take on in order to pay the owner a fair sale price and still be able to operate in a manner that it is not overburdened such that it becomes at risk. And so from that perspective, a business owner can achieve a fair sale price. Also, when you are selling a business to a newly created employee-owned entity, you as the business owner can craft your own timeline. So we often see circumstances where a business owner has in mind that they want to exit over the course of 12 months or 16 months or whatever the case might be, but the acquirer that they have engaged through a broker or through a business platform is like, well, we'd really like to take over the business in the next 4 months. We've got strategic decisions we want to make. Or there is some other circumstance that becomes a driver that doesn't fit with the business owner's timeline. And, again, to my comment about Annie and I frequently being psychologists, it's traumatic. A business owner might be ready to sell their business, but might not be ready to let it go in the next 12, 18 months or whatever the case might be. In the case of employee ownership, a business owner can control that time path. And then finally, small businesses, very often you hear them referred to as they're like family. And small business owners want to preserve their legacy in a way that in big business you see as less likely. The culture and the people within the organization are really important, and connection to community are really important. And small business owners find that through employee ownership, they're more likely to be able to achieve those goals than, again, selling to an outside buyer who might not have connection to the community, who might not have an interest in seeing to it that the workforce remains in place, et cetera, et cetera. So there are 3 primary forms of employee ownership, 3 primary models. The one that you're probably most familiar with is employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs. These have existed since 1954, and they're ostensibly a retirement plan. ESOPs are usually conveyed on larger businesses, larger by workforce. Project equity usually has a threshold of a minimum of around 35 employees and about 750 grand in EBITDA. We tend to work with manufacturing companies that are good prospects for ESOPs. Manufacturing companies are really interesting to us because they tend to have larger frontline workforce, oftentimes LMI workers that we can positively impact through business ownership. ESOPs are regulated by ERISA law and therefore are a more expensive form of employee ownership to engage. They require valuation on an annual basis and any one of a number of regulatory costs that the other forms of employee ownership don't entail. But for the right size company in the right space, ESOPs are a great vehicle. Worker cooperatives, which you may also be familiar with, are another form of employee ownership. Worker cooperatives, built into them is governance by the workforce in a way that you don't see in an ESOP. ESOPs are represented on the board of a company by a trustee. In worker cooperatives, the workforce has more direct governance. They elect the board of directors, and the workforce also has more say over, for instance, decisions strategic decisions that the business might make, not operating decisions. We like operations to remain as is. So I'll give you an example. We could have a business that is we'll use the manufacturing, a small manufacturing machine shop as an example. You could have a person who has been, say, the controller for that business for 30 years, and they can sit on the board and they can have some responsibility for governance while sitting on the board, but they're not dictating what happens on a day-to-day basis in operations. In other words, they're still reporting to their boss. And we like that because if a business is operated successfully for a number of years and it is in a position that, through our due diligence, we understand that it can be transitioned to employee ownership and remain successful, why would we want to change operations? So worker cooperatives, you will see that governance shift with the workers in mind, but not operations. Employee ownership trusts, they're a bit of a hybrid, like ESOPs. They have a trust mechanism in place, but more like co-ops, they can have more direct governance or less direct governance. They're very customizable, flexible model. They're essentially modeled after U.S. trust law, which also makes them much more turnkey because there are more lawyers, accountants, other practitioners who are familiar with the trust structure. So we're going to share with you real quickly the example of Delta Pipeline. Delta Pipeline is a Long Beach, California business that is in the business of constructing pipeline. And Craig Danley, their owner, is a big advocate for ESOPs and was very inclined to sharing this ownership with his team. So, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
If you're an owner and you do not have a succession plan yet, it's never too early to start. And to think that somebody's just going to buy what we created, you might get lucky, but it might go for a big discount, who knows, and then you're going to be working for somebody for a while. You get to be better, you get to grow. And it's not only about your retirement, it's about what happens to you while you're building a company, while you become an owner, and what it means to think that way. It changes the way that you actually interact with your colleagues, your family, your supervisors, your community. It's an incredible experience. Not easy, but well worth the effort. I'm passionate about how to make our world better. I'm passionate about how do we share what we work for. I can't take it with me. I can't take the knowledge with me. I can't take the experience with me. It's all going to end someday. Sooner than later, more than likely. And as a steward, it's my job to give it back.
So Craig, wonderful man, he falls into the category of business owners that we at Project Equity refer to as mission driven. And you would be surprised at the number of small business owners, small, medium-sized business owners who really do share our mission and would like to see ownership of their business conveyed to their workforce. We also define business owners as mission aligned. So those are business owners who maybe don't have the same passion about sharing ownership with their workforce that Craig does, but they actually see the value in it once Project Equity introduces it to them. And as long as they can get the fair sale price that they seek, are happy to engage in employee ownership transition. The other folks that we engage as business owners are what we refer to as bottom line focused. And they're great too. They want to see a fair price for their business, and we work with them just as we work with the other examples. But it's folks like Craig that we like to elevate because he is so passionate about employee ownership. Another example is a Slice of New York, which is a small chain of Italian pizza restaurants in the Bay Area. And one of the notable items about Slice of New York is just the sheer amount of profits that once they become employee owned, they've been able to share with their workforce over the year. And this is not an exception to the rule. Now, it so happens that they do a very prolific business. And so the amount, the dollar volume is pretty staggering, but it's not unusual for small businesses to be able to share profits really significantly with their frontline workers. We've had examples of businesses that we've transitioned where the owner was paying themselves $180,000 salary and then taking distributions of another, $150,000, $200,000 over the course of a year. And once that owner has exited, guess where that money sits? On the balance sheet, and where it can be distributed now to the workforce in the form of profit sharing. You also see that those businesses often accelerate in terms of their profitability because the workers are duly noted. Another example, not included in this particular presentation, but we worked with another food business in the Bay Area, and we elevate the story of one of the workers, a woman named Sarah Vegas, who had never made more than about $12 an hour in any job. And her very first profit sharing check was $9,000, which was the largest check that she had ever received, and worked out to basically doubling her hourly wage. All of this is examples of how it is that once we transition a business into an employee-owned model, there are benefits availed of the workforce that they just don't necessarily see in the existing legacy model. So the question is, how does all this magic happen? When we say we're selling a business to the workforce, we're not actually going to the workers and passing a hat and saying, you know what, guess what? If you guys can come up with, $500,000, which we've assessed the business value at, you can own it. No, what we do, in fact, is after we understand what the value of the business is through our debt capacity analysis, Project Equity then structures a loan. That loan can be capitalized from our loan fund and oftentimes from our CDFI partners who share our values. And one of those values is that we don't obligate the workforce to any personal guarantee. The workers don't have to come up with the money to buy the business. What happens is the business pays for itself out of its going forward cash flow. So if we determine that the business is, again, if it's worth $500,000, then in an example like that, we would write a loan for, say, 70% of that amount, for $350,000, and write that check to the business owner. And we'd ask the business owner to carry a seller note for the other 30%, $150,000. In the capital stack, Project Equity is the primary debt holder with the owner in the second seat. And again, the business pays the debt through its going forward cash flow, which we've already assessed through our due diligence process that the business can comfortably do. If the business can't comfortably service the debt, Project Equity does not do the deal. We don't do the deal for a variety of reasons, but core to our work is we want to see employee-owned businesses succeed. We don't want to saddle frontline workers with a business that's a failure, and with our mission in mind to see that employee ownership models become normalized, we don't want to have a slate of failed businesses in our portfolio. So we assure that we do the best that we can, diligence, to assure that the business will succeed going forward after the sale. So again, some of the advantages you see here, market price, tax advantages. So again, in either a co-op or an ESOP, business owner may see some ability to defer capital gains on the sale of the business. In an ESOP, again, because it's a retirement, it's structuring the business as a retirement program, the percentage of the business that becomes ESOP, so let's say it's a 50% sale to the ESOP, that 50% is no longer subject to federal income tax. So the business operates at a distinct tax advantage once it becomes employee owned. And that was written into ESOP law specifically to motivate business owners to want to sell to an ESOP. Owner controls the process. There's flexible financing opportunities. And, it's the last item here, but one of the most important to us it strengthens local economies. So how do we transition? So this slide illustrates the process. So when we first engage in a community, we do a lot of awareness raising so that community understands more about employee ownership, why it's important. Specific to the data that we shared earlier with you about businesses at risk in Arizona, that's the type of data that we would elevate so that folks in the community understand, hey, this employee ownership thing could be really helpful to us as a community insofar as retaining businesses. Once we do that work, Annie and the team go about webinars and in the before times, in-person convenings and conferences, pulling together business owners and business connectors. Those are the folks who influence business owners. So their attorney, their accountant, their financial advisor, their business banker. We talk to those folks, elevate the message of employee ownership and the advantage so that they can share it with their clients, right? Then their clients will come to us. And that's where we start this step one of exploration. So we talk to the business owner more about employee ownership in much the way we're sharing it with you today. And if the business owner has an interest and, through our own diligence during those exploration discussions, we think that the business is a good fit for a feasibility analysis, we will then pass them into that step of our work, which involves direct engagement with our client services team. These are the sort of management consultant folks that work at Project Equity. And they're the ones who do the deep dive on the business, understanding everything about its workforce, its capacity for management change, its financial structure, its debt capacity, et cetera, all with it in mind that if it's feasible at the end of this 6 to 8 week process, we'll provide a report to the business owner that's essentially a straw model. If you wanted to do a transition, this is what it would look like. If the business owner says, this is great, love it, I want to go forward with the transition, then we enter that process. It runs anywhere from 9 to 12 months. It depends on the size of the business. Again, it also depends on what's the urgency of the business owner to transition. And then finally, after the business is, the deal is closed and the sale occurs, Project Equity engages a program that we call Thrive. That's essentially our technical support. So we stay engaged with the businesses for 2 years, at least, if the business wants us to be engaged for a longer period of time, minimum 2 years to assure its success going forward. So this slide just illustrates point by point what it is that we do in our feasibility analysis. This is what we ask business owners to think about. This is also one of the things that we put in front of business connectors. So, ask your business owner clients, are they profitable and have they been in good financial health for the past 5 years? What is their workforce composition? And what's the business's track record? With regard to the first check item, profitable company, there's an asterisk next to that right now because COVID has so impacted so many businesses. And we've actually had to tweak our due diligence process to control for the past year, 18 months, 2 years now in terms of determining a business's viability going forward. Yeah, and so I think that would be a wrap. I want to make sure to leave time for your questions, and we're 45 minutes into the hour. So appreciate your time and happy to answer questions. We can either go through the chat. Is that the best way that we'd like to approach this? Barbara, you tell me, what would you prefer?
I'll help moderate some questions. I do see a few things have come up, and maybe we can start there. There was a question from Allison about partnering, that maybe that's what the business was looking at. But then also she asked about resources for profit sharing. I know you brought that up. I guess it goes back to, what's that exit strategy for a business, and how does a business owner begin to think about that?
Sure. So, as I said at the top, a lot of business owners put off thinking about succession, but when they do, they're typically thinking of the vehicles that are most familiar. So family succession or selling their business, right? Project Equity is unique in that because we're a nonprofit, we are really strong advocates for employee ownership, but we also are advocates for businesses staying rooted in local communities. So through the consultation phase, Allison, and hopefully I'm answering this question for you, through the consultation phase, we advocate for employee ownership to the degree that we see that it's a fit with the business owner's objectives and with the business itself operationally. But if it's not a fit, and not every business is a fit for employee ownership, then we will look for other ways, or the ability to make other recommendations, or how a business can stay locally owned, can stay in the community. We're just starting to pilot some strategies for what we refer to as micro businesses. So micros are businesses aren't necessarily fit for employee ownership succession, because if they have fewer than 5 employees, it becomes really difficult for the loan to support the transaction, for us to underwrite that loan. It becomes too risky, because if you've got a 5-person business and one person decides to leave, move out of town, or someone, God forbid, gets sick or passes away, then it may put the whole business at risk. So in those instances, those businesses wouldn't, when we're talking about succession, we're talking about alternatives that maybe are other than employee ownership. But in general, we try to advocate for employee ownership first. Does that help?
Yes, no, I think it's very helpful. Abby asked a question as they set up a new business. Can they plan for a service like this, or some assistance in establishing what that exit strategy is?
Sure. So interestingly enough, we've been doing a lot of work with the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, which is basically mid-career business owners. These aren't folks who are necessarily looking to retire. And one of the things that we're doing is we're putting employee ownership on the menu for these business owners early in their trajectory, so they can start to have that as part of their plan. It also so happens that, again, employee ownership is not just a succession strategy. We found during COVID that employee ownership could help businesses survive and thrive through COVID. So an example would be a business owner decides that they want to sell 30% of equity to their workforce. And I use 30% because that's our threshold, a minimum 30% transaction. So we would finance that deal, and the workforce now has 30%. And guess what? As I pointed out earlier, now you've got a fully engaged workforce because they're equity holders, right? So they're more productive. They're focused on the bottom line. They're like willing to engage the work in a way, with that ownership mentality, that ownership culture that they wouldn't have otherwise. Now, we've had business owners say to us, well, I'm selling 30% of my equity, and my equity is already depressed because of COVID. And my response is, you see these other businesses that are having difficulty recruiting, retaining or rewarding their workforce. You actually now, because of employee ownership, have a strategy that can address all 3 of those items. And oh, by the way, the increased productivity that you're going to see is actually going to end up getting you back some of your diluted equity over time in terms of value. So after we reframe it like that, the business owner sees it, okay, so this isn't just a succession strategy, it's also a productivity strategy. So we can talk to new business owners about employee ownership with it being in mind that it might be years down the road insofar as their succession plan, or it could be 3 years from now when they want to ramp up productivity by having their workforce be co-owners with them.
And that kind of follows along with Marcus's question about if a business doesn't have positive financial health now, but wants to offer that employee ownership in the future, what should they be doing? And I see Marcus here, if you'd like to chime in and add or follow on to your question.
Yeah, so for me, I've been a small business counselor, and then I also work with Local First Arizona. And a lot of times, many people we speak to are not in a financial position where they can really offer equity to their employees, but they want to. So I know in this case, some people are probably listening on here right now. What would be a good suggestion to kind of get them in that phase of either preparing to get to that point where they can either prepare financial health, or is it something that they consider right now?
So thank you for the question, Marcus. When you say they're not in a financial position to offer equity, do you mean because the debt structure of the business wouldn't support the loan transaction required?
Exactly. They may be in some form of debts or outstanding loans or credit cards, or
Sure.
they might not have enough right now on their bottom line to really be able to offer as equity to employees. And in this situation, there could be an employee that wants to leave the company, but they want to keep them to offer it, but they know it's not a thing that they could do right now. How would you go about suggesting that to them in terms of like phases? Because we know it's something they want to offer, but maybe it's something they can do eventually, maybe in a year or maybe 2 years.
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. The business owner can wait until they're right side up on their balance sheet and their run rate, and decide that, okay, now I want to offer equity because I'm in a positive position. But truth be told, startup companies all throughout Silicon Valley and all over the country offer equity before they're right side up all the time, and it serves as an incentive tool. And so those business owners could reasonably structure some form of equity, employee ownership, through a commitment to becoming employee owned in the future, and use it as an incentive tool for their workforce. We at Project Equity, focus on employee ownership transitions because it's really important for us to see the business value conveyed on low and moderate income workers in real time. So we want to work specifically with currently successful businesses or businesses that have had some track record. We would be less likely to work directly with that company to offer incentive equity, particularly if it isn't in a position to transition right away. But we would work with a business owner that wanted to put their business on what we call a pathway to employee ownership. And with that in mind, we at Project Equity, we actually have a loan fund that we can help out certain small businesses through some loan capital. In many instances, it can be forgivable if the business makes a commitment to employee ownership and does so within a certain time path, and there are other stipulations. One of the things that I would also put forward to you is that as we're working in Arizona, and specifically with Kimber and the team at Local First, it would be to help to develop the capacity in Arizona to educate business owners about employee ownership. So even if a business is not in a position to transition or offer that equity upfront now, have it on the business owner's radar and have them have the ability to at least talk to their workforce about it as something that might be out in the near-term future. You never want a business owner to make promises that they can't deliver on, but we think that if the education is there and the understanding of it, then they can have it as part of their tool set as they start to move forward. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. Thank you. And just last add on from me, and then I'll open up the restroom. I don't want to hog the room. In terms of any type of a commitment, does that need to be written down in stone with like some sort of lawyer, or could that be something as simple as maybe a handshake or verbal commitment?
No, if we're putting our loan capital at risk, we're we're going to ask that there'll be a commitment to it. What happens is, we understand that there's inherent risk. We do our due diligence. The main stipulation is that the business owner has to be committed to employee ownership. That is, if they're not committed to employee ownership after a certain strike date in the future, then the loan capital is not forgivable. They got to repay it.
Understood. Thank you.
But it's true, we saw with this pandemic, a lot of the small business owners, or some of them, right, chose to close their doors. And I think pointed to, whether it was a time for, retirement for them was impending. And again, they didn't have a succession strategy or that exit strategy in place. And I think, again, we saw some doors close on some longtime businesses that are truly, what we kind of call the essence of Tucson, right? The unique, independently owned mom and pop businesses. And I think that's where, we're really sensitive to that. And I think this offers us a way to look at things differently in the community. So I think it's been a really great conversation. I want to ask if there's any other questions out there from those who are here. Yes, go ahead.
Is there a company in Tucson, employee-owned company in Tucson that is building affordable housing?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer to. I know there have been some microbreweries and a few others. I don't know if a member of my team, Jeffrey or Amanda, are familiar with any housing entities that are employee owned. No, not yet. So, but we'll keep an eye out for that. And if that's something you have a question about, Hanson, maybe ask the team here. Evan and Annie might be able to give you some examples. Have you experienced that in other places, Evan?
Well, we've run across so many different businesses. We have a saying in house: you've seen one small business, you've seen one small business. Hanson, to your question, we actually engaged a business in South Los Angeles. It was a real estate developer that was looking to transition to employee ownership and also have its real estate portfolio, be part of the transition. And it was a highly complex deal, if you can imagine, trying to structure that. But it was a very mission-focused opportunity, but it was one that the complexity was such that we couldn't make it pencil out. So we've had some engagement with that sort of business, one that's looking to a developer of affordable housing that also wanted to become employee owned because they just had a real strong mission orientation. But sometimes it's really difficult for us to sort of intersect those missions into a single deal. Is that helpful?
Yes.
All right. Any other questions or comments at this point?
Barbara, if I could,
yes.
I just wanted to put a finer point on your comment about you all seeing businesses that were failing or struggling through COVID. Part of the reason that we work with localities, and you can take a look on our website and see our many partners nationally. But in addition to the outreach work that we do with business connectors and business owners, is we do work with the local economic development folks to educate them about employee ownership. So this strategy is one that they can do interventions with business owners sooner when they start to see these crises arrive. We also work with workforce development boards who oftentimes have visibility to businesses that might be struggling or might need to do layoffs. And so we know that if we can get employee ownership into y'all's toolbox earlier, then we can truncate some of those business closures that you all saw.
That's great. And we will certainly have follow-up conversations. I think there's some valuable resources. Abby actually asked in the chat your website and how they can contact you. You're welcome to put that information there and mention it here. But I think this won't be the last that we've heard from you. We've learned a lot, and I appreciate the time that you've shared with everyone today. So with that, it's coming upon our closing time. So thank our speakers. And again, I do want to give a word of thanks to Councilmember Lane Santa Cruz. She has long asked me about worker cooperatives and employee-owned business models. And I struggled for the longest time to find the right resources. And again, appreciate my team, Jeffrey Anthony, Amanda Bruno, and Irene Messina, who helped me uncover some of these amazing opportunities. So again, with that, I think we'll close today's session, and we'll be sure to bring you back together in November. As a matter of fact, it will be Monday, November 29th at 3 p.m. Watch your inbox for the announcement and registration links. Next month, we'll hear from some of our grant recipients of our economic and workforce development grant programs. Be sure to tune in and hear the successes of that program and how it's helped individuals, small businesses, and others overcome economic recovery. And you'll get an update on the timing of our next call for applications for this program coming up next year. We'll keep you connecting for success. And you can also call our City of Tucson Economic Initiative Small Business Assistance Line at 520-837-4100 and visit connecttucson.com for resources and sign up to receive our email updates. So with that, everyone, have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.